So I had a college assignment that was due in a couple days. I decided to make a clone of the game Defender in Pure C as a challenge to myself in only about 12 hours. Defender is a side-scrolling arcade game from 1981. The player controls a spaceship that can shoot lasers. The object of the game is to destroy all the alien invaders whilst protecting humans on the planet's surface. There's more to the game than that, but for the purposes of this video it's irrelevant. In order to get the game done in a short time frame, I decided to modify the game concept a little. Instead of there being separate levels and multiple enemy types, there's only one alien enemy that picks up humans and drops them to their death. The player can save these falling humans by catching them and bringing them down to the surface. The objective is just to hold out as long as possible until all the humans die. First, I needed to set up my project and get a basic window open with SDL to display graphics. I used GCC to compile C, so I set up a makefile to make things easier for myself. There's a bunch of fancy stuff in makefiles that I don't understand, so I won't really attempt explaining it other than I list what files the compiler needs to compile and what it needs to include for libraries, as well as the name of the exe file it spits out. And I added a batch file to run the appropriate command so I don't have to type it over and over. SDL already is a C library, so setting it up was pretty much the same as it is in C++. Just set up a window pointer, a renderer pointer, then run the SDL create function, check if it succeeds, otherwise outputting some error details with a handy macro, then SDL create renderer, and you get the picture. Setting up the game loop is easy, just by creating a while loop. We also capture SDL events like SDL quit with SDL pull events and then switch case for each event type. Finally, we clean up everything after the loop finishes by destroying the renderer in the window. To get things rendering, in the loop we clear the renderer and then use SDL render fill rect to draw an SDL rect to the window. Now to actually write the game. I started off with the player structure. C doesn't have classes, so the best thing I thought to do was to make a player struct and then make functions specifically for constructing and destructing it, and then functions for updating the player and rendering. For now, the player is just a rectangle. I also created a struct for terrain. The terrain has chunks of a one-dimensional height map. Given an array of ints, it will draw the terrain with STL render draw line. Temporarily, I added a way to scroll the screen by pressing left or right on the arrow keys. A thing I had trouble figuring out was how to get the terrain to infinitely loop. Eventually, I landed on a modular function that factors in negative numbers to loop the height map around on itself no matter where the screen is scrolled. Here's what it looks like so far. Next, I added the minimap at the top of the screen, which was pretty much the same as drawing it normally, but smaller and centered in the middle of the screen. Then I added some movement to the player's ship when you press left or right. The ship accelerates in the direction, and then maxes out at a certain speed. Since the player is just a red rectangle, I decided to add a ship sprite. I found this one on OpenGameArt. SDL only natively supports BMP, so I converted all the graphics for the game into BMP. I also made the screen scroll depending on the direction the player is moving so they can see ahead of them. Next, I added lasers the player could shoot. This was a bit of a challenge because I wanted to dynamically spawn and delete bullets, but C doesn't have std vector to easily do that. I decided to create an array in the player's struct that can hold a max of 4 laser pointers at a time. The array initially holds null instead of pointers to the lasers. When a laser is allocated, it finds a free spot in the array and adds a pointer to itself. When a laser is destroyed, its memory is freed and the index they took up is set to null again. Lasers are destroyed when they go off screen. After all that, I added a new struct for alien lander ships. For now, they just display a sprite and fall down to the surface. Unfortunately, I spent an entire day doing this, even staying up way past a decent time, so I was pretty much dead in the morning when I had to go to class. But this is what I had so far. The next day I started working again. I added some random variation to the falling speed of the landers and started adding the human struct. I made lasers destroy landers by checking if the rectangle intersects with the rectangle of a lander on the screen. This is done easily by using the built-in STL function STL has intersection. Not to be confused with STL intersect rect. This function is broken for whatever reason, and it took me a while to figure this out. Humans have 3 states: roaming, falling, and being picked up. In the roaming state, they randomly decide to walk left or right. In the falling state, they just fall down until hitting the ground. If they fall for long enough, they will die. And when they're picked up, their thinking is turned off. Doing some research on C, I found an interesting way to store multiple types of a struct in the same array. Using a union, you can store pointers to one of the structs, and then you can have an array of those unions. Also using an enum to tell which struct is currently being stored in the union so the game can correctly call the according functions. Storing enemies and humans was much the same as storing bullets in the player. The game starts with 6 humans, and if they're all killed, the game quits. During all of this I had a huge headache of a bug I couldn't figure out for hours. The game would seemingly crash on launch for no reason. After combing over everything and rewriting things, I found that I had an invalid malloc call. I was getting the size of a null pointer. It's a miracle at all that the game didn't crash beforehand. Getting the rest of the game done was pretty easy after sorting out another weird bug with my distant calculations for the landers when they were near humans. Since I was getting short on time, this is all I could finish without losing my sanity. Here's what the final product looks like. If you wish to play this game for whatever reason, you can download it from the GitHub release in the description, or you can also look at the probably terrible code yourself on the repository. Thanks for watching.